All right, guys, it's not very often I have a bunch of really cool Seiko divers all at one time. So I want to take this opportunity to kind of show them side by side, and we'll do some comparisons. We'll talk about the different movements, the different price points, and which one is going to work best for you potentially, because this is a choice that often we're faced with when you're buying at these price points, and you don't necessarily have the option to try some of these on. They're not always available to us depending on where your closest AD is and what they have. Some of these are JDM models. There should be US counterparts for these if you go to a good authorized dealer for Seiko, with the exception of, like, you're not going to find this limited edition Sumo, but you might be able to find a Sumo. I think, is a Sumo in the States? I can't remember. And you're not going to be able to find the SKX. So this one's definitely going to have to be online, but I suspect if you're watching this video, you're probably pretty familiar with the SKX. Maybe you have owned a few, maybe own some now. But if you're not, this is kind of the icon in more recent collecting for sure. You know, obviously there's some Seiko divers that predate this that are way more iconic, but since I've been into watches and since many of you have probably been into watches, the SKX is the one that resonates throughout the community. So these can still be had for around $250 to $350 depending on your source. Hopefully you can find yourself a good stock one. If not, there are probably a ton of different like modded variants out there that you can get decent deals on. It's still going to be an SKX. Heck, you can actually build one from scratch. You can go on to Moki's. I think I just noticed I got an email from them. They're even carrying the like stock Seiko dials or something now. So you can pretty much build one from scratch, and that might be a better option for you versus taking the risk of getting a not very good condition or authentic SKX. Maybe just start from square one potentially. But when you go with the SKX, you have a ton of options when it comes to straps. So even if you don't want to mess around with the watch itself, like here I have it on this Clockwork Republic FKM strap with solid end links, and I really love this combination. I think most people will agree with me, unless you're just anti FKM straps, you're going to like the fit and finish of this. So let me pop this on wrist real quick. I'm going to try to do a wrist shot of each one. We'll do some side by sides, all of that good stuff. So there you can see it on my 7¼ inch wrist. Absolute perfect. I love it on this combination. The factory, Jubilee style bracelet that the SKX comes on is charming and it's fun. There's a ton of strap code bracelets, all of that stuff. I don't think I'm going to get too much into sizes. We're just going to go raw video here. So that's from the bottom up. Let's go to the next lowest one, which would be the MM200. This one is the dark blue hole, I think they call it. It's the SPB083. It's using the movement 6R15. The SKX is a non-hack, non-hand winding 7S movement. This one is a far superior when it comes to specs and potentially timekeeping, but that's all relative. So this one is the 6R15. It's going to have a 50-hour power reserve. You're going to be able to hand wind and hack the movement, and of course you have 120 click bezel, just like all of these do, and they're very Seiko feeling. So it's not like any other diver out there. I've tried so many different brands, and Seiko definitely has their own feel and vibe to their watches, their cases, and definitely their bezel action. This one has a nice coin edge on the bezel, and you can see excellent polish, and it comes to a point here. There's no brushed breaking on this like you're going to see on the MM300, 200 Reduced, and the Sumo. This one is full polish, much like the SKX, but the SKX is bellied out. It doesn't have that sharp ridge to it, if that makes sense. And there they are side by side. Nice bracelet on this. It's going to have a pin and collar bracelet. Of course, strap options are going to be out there as well, both from strap code, or you can put the factory silicone strap on the watch from Seiko, but just a good overall size. Now, I think this one's going to lend itself to be more on the little bit larger wrist, meaning like it works totally fine on my 7¼ inch wrist. But say you have like a 6.5, 6 3/4 inch wrist, this one's probably going to be a little too unwieldy for you. I think you're definitely going to want to look more towards the SKX or the MM200 Reduced, and potentially even the 300. A lot of people think the 300 is huge, but I'm going to show you it's not. This one's actually larger. And then even the Sumo, I know people with smaller wrists that will wear the Sumo. So here's the Sumo next to the 200. So I don't know, Seikos are kind of weird. They have that weird magic where people with smaller wrists can still rock them. So even though I just said this one might be too large for your 6 3/4 inch wrist, who the heck am I to say, man? Try one on, because it might surprise you. It might just work perfect on your wrist. So this is where it gets a little tricky. I don't think we're going to do this one next. I think the next in line price-wise is going to be the MM200 Reduced. Now, I'm only speaking on this particular variant. This was purchased from Nomen, so the price is set from Nomen on this one as a SBDC 127, and you can see a little bit smaller in dimensions. And I think overall, as easy as it is to read the larger handset arrow for the hour hand there, I think I'm leaning more towards the clean, traditional aspect that this watch on the left, the MM200 Reduced, presents. It just seems more normal or something. Not that that's always good, but in this case, I don't know, I'm just gravitating towards it more. And the case size is a little bit smaller, about the same thickness. You can see there is that brushed break on the side of the case. You still have the coin edge bezel, but it's a little larger, you know, in the coin edging on it versus this. This is finer. And is finer? Yeah, more fine? Yeah, I don't know, whatever. Stick around, I'll continue to butcher the English language. Even when I put it on wrist, it just feels better on wrist. Now, in my current state of the collection, I'm enjoying a little bit smaller watches. So this one definitely fits in more for me on that aspect. Kind of feels more like, I don't have a Black Bay 58 around here. I don't know what else. I mean, it feels a little bit better on wrist for me personally. It just feels like it plants better and just looks better for my current taste. So here it is next to the SKX. Pretty similar in size, a little bit longer lug to lug. Similar thickness. Love the offset crowns. The other thing that makes a big difference on these is none of these crowns are guarded on these. The only one that's guarded is on the SKX. Okay, so now we can move to the Sumo. The Sumo, this one currently is like $1,250. Now this is the limited edition, so this is the SPB 247, and you can get Sumos way, way cheaper than this, non-limited edition ones, and you're still going to get the same watch essentially. You know, you have the date magnifier on this one, and you have some of the best case finishing. Well, you know, we used to say that, but the finishing on that MM200 and even the Reduced, and then well, that's more money, the 300, is really up there. So I feel like they're on par with the Sumo, but the Sumo is traditionally one of the best finished cases out there in the earlier days. And these wear amazing on wrist because just the overall design, it's totally different than any other like traditional Seiko cushion case, even, because like the bezel's submerged down into the case, and it almost gives you the feel that it's like submerging itself into your wrist, and that's the way it feels when you put it on wrist. It just absolutely curves and hugs the wrist, and it has a nice presence to it. Now when you size this, I think when you get these a little bit larger watches, I wouldn't go super loose. If you can get a really good fit on this thing, it is gonna, it's magic. It's so crazy that this one, larger than the MM200, this one feels better on wrist than the MM200. Just the feel on my wrist, nothing else. All right, so now the big dog. So now we jump up to Nomen's price on this guy, the SBDX025. Oh, I forgot to mention, the movement in the Reduced is actually a 6R35, so it has 70-hour power reserve versus the 50 that you're going to see in the 200 and the Sumo. And then you jump up to the MM300. This is the Mac Daddy of them all. So it's going to have the 8L movement in it, which is loosely based on, or closely based on, a Grand Seiko 9S movement. So you're going to have the 4 Hertz. It's regulated, the best I can tell. The bezel action is premier feeling. It's still Seiko feeling, but it's premier Seiko feeling. Everything should line up on it. You're going to have a lume ceramic bezel insert. You have a silver date wheel. You have that iconic MM300 handset, and just an amazing watch. A little bit heavier. You have the monocoque design case, and then you have absolute beautiful finishing, if you can look past the smudging that I've done. You have that crazy dive extension thing they have here, where you just kind of pull that up and it just extends right there. Quite a bit of extension on it as well. And then the comfort on wrist is just on like off the charts with this, other than it is heavy. I feel like the comfort level for me is probably going to be the SKX, the 200 Reduced, the Sumo, then the 300, and then the 200. But that's just my take on it. Everyone's going to be different. Everybody's wrist is different. But there's how that looks next to the Sumo. Of course, I'll show it next to the SKX. And next to the 200. So very similar, but then check out the similarities when you put it next to the 200 Reduced. Extremely similar. I feel like it is very similar. So much to the point where, do you really need the 300? I mean, it's a lot more money. You can pick these up for like $1,100. This one's going to be just under $3,000. So it's quite the stretch. Now, if your thirst is only going to be quenched when you land an MM300, then you absolutely need to go all the way. But if you're looking for a placeholder until you get there, check out the MM200 Reduced. I think you're going to find that it's similar in a lot of ways, more so than it's not. So here is the MM300 on wrist. These are thick, these are tall, and they have a little bit of weight to them, but it still plants and wears good. You're definitely going to want to size this so if fits on the wrist a little bit more snug. And it might be difficult to do with this bracelet. The links are kind of long on this, so it might be a challenge to get a perfect fit on it, but there still is some aftermarket straps or bracelets available for this. All right, I think I covered just about everything. I will mention, unless you're like full-on Seiko-aholic and you absolutely, like I said, you absolutely need the 300, now you're into that price range where $27.90 is no man's price on this. I was just looking at, again, it's $1,000 more, but you can pick up a Tudor Black Bay 58, which in-house movement, COSC, beautiful watch, probably one of my favorites under the $5,000 range. $3,700. It's basically $1,000 more than this. Again, it's hard to compare, I think, cross brands. It's a little easier for me to run through a lineup in Seiko, and if you're just Seiko minded and you're Seiko-aholic, and that's where you want to live, that's where you want to be, that's the experience you want to do. But when you start looking at some of the other options, it gets very complicated very quickly. So a lot of people do ask me, this or that. Both. I mean, check them both out. It's when you're narrowing down your choices to two different watches from two different brands that are similar potentially, or at least in the price range, then I think you basically need to maybe check them both out. I mean, if you've narrowed it down to two, you've gone a long way, because most of us lust after like more than two. So if you can get it down to two, I think you're doing pretty good. Let's kill the lights, check the lume on these. I babbled way too long. The lume on these are all very good. So here's the MM300 next to the SKX. Look at the old dog still kicking it. The MM300 is doing really good. Here it is next to the Sumo. The 200, you have a little more real estate, I feel like, on that broad arrow hand, but I feel like the 200s are a little bit weaker, and then you have even less real estate on the 200 Reduced. Look how dim that looks. So they definitely lacked out on the lume on this guy. All right, guys, hopefully this helped or confused it more for you. I don't know. I'll see you on the next vid.